Hi everyone, I'm Gary Knoll. Nice to have you with us where we're here to talk about health and nutrition issues. Today, once again, we're taking our camera out on the road around the world to show you about one of the most important and fearful topics we know of. But maybe after watching this, you won't be so afraid. It's about cancer and all the natural approaches, both the causes of cancer and non-toxic alternative treatments. Join us now as we explore alternative approaches to cancer. In today's society, cancer is epidemic and the single most important medical issue, an issue inseparable from politics and economics. Tens of billions of dollars in an entire industry in which over 800,000 people work full-time are involved. The war on cancer has led to the formation of an enormous army consisting of the National Cancer Institute, the American Cancer Society, and other major cancer research centers throughout the country. Each year, just before the American Cancer Society's annual fundraising drive, we're bombarded with good news stories of an imminent breakthrough that could change the lives of millions of sufferers. Months after the collection pots have been passed, there is still no breakthrough, and the human toll and suffering continues to rise. 150,000 one year, 480,000 another year, 550. Now it's estimated that next year cancer will possibly get 675,000 deaths, second only to heart disease in this country. And while there have been some gains in treating new forms of cancer, overall, we have lost the war.
Cancer is the unregulated proliferation of your own cells. Your own body cells get changed and they grow out of proportion.
Since the war against cancer was declared in 1972 by President Nixon and the then president of the NCI, Dr. Vincent T. DeVita, more people have died of cancer than in any other time in history.
There are many reasons for having a higher incidence of cancer over the course of the last 40 years in the United States, one of which, the major one, is nutritional factors, followed by tobacco and alcohol and many other risk factors. But the major ones are totally controllable, and we can prevent the illness.
The National Institutes of Science estimates that 60% of women's cancers, particularly endometrial cancers and breast cancers, and 40% of men's cancers, particularly prostate and gastrointestinal cancers, are related to nutritional factors.
About 75% of all breast cancers have been caused in the 20th century by medical x-rays, misuse and overuse.
The whole cancer field really needs to be looked at as both a biological disease and a social and political disease. In order to cure cancer, we really have to cure cancer policy making.
We've published data. We've shown that there is a way to cure malignant melanoma. The National Cancer Institute has the data. What are they going to do with it?
There's no reason why so many people have to die with the plethora of naturopathic and other holistic therapies out there for cancer treatment.
We at the John Wayne Institute think of ourselves as being at the beginning of the end of the development of cancer therapy.
The people who do the best, in my experience, are the people who do so who are calm and centered and are just going about what they're doing with a passion for self-discovery rather than a desperate quest to save their lives.
People have to take charge of their own healing. They have to be participators, not spectators in their own healing. It's very important.
To get cancer, first your cells have to be what we call initiated, and that may be 20 or 30 years before your actual cancer turns up. Something happens, maybe you're exposed to a chemical. Fat, for example, is an initiator. And then years later, there's promotion. A second event happens, which then seals the fate of that cell, and it starts growing on its own. And instead of having a life of, say, 50 or 60 cell divisions, it can now divide as long as it wants to until it kills the host, and then it dies too.
it was Otto Warburg in 1923 that discovered the mechanism of cancer. What he discovered was that cancer is a creation of hypoxia, or low oxygen. And as a result of that low oxygen, most healthy human cells die. However, a few of them try to survive, and they survive by switching their method of obtaining energy, their ATP, through, instead of the oxidative process, in the fermentation process. Let me refer, if I may, to this chart. We have, here we have the oxygen process, energy that's created by oxidation. This is a very healthy way to create energy, and the body demands this. Healthy cells demand this form of oxygenation and energy. If they don't receive it, many of them die. A few, however, adapt, because survival is a law even at the cellular level. They adapt and they create their energy, their ATP, by fermentation.
For more than 30 years, we were told that there was no diet link to cancer. Now we know that's not the case, that an improper diet, high in animal proteins and animal fats, refined sugars, indeed is connected as a causative factor.
You can have an excess of poor foods, such as foods with preservatives, processed foods, white flour, white sugar, and also foods that are too high in protein, high animal protein diet. Those would be excesses. And you can have a deficiency of vitamins because you have this kind of diet. Vitamins, minerals, important things that you need for health.
We need to recognize that when someone has cancer, it's when at least their immune system can no longer contain abnormal cell proliferation, which has many different causes. And our state of nutrition has direct effects on our immune system and other bodily functions as well, so that if we are, for example, have imbalances in our protein, carbohydrate, or fat intake, for example, too much fat, there have been correlations between too much fat and an increased incidence of cancer, or genetically we just may have different vitamin, mineral, and enzyme needs which are not met by our current Western diets, you might say.
As far as diet is concerned, there's two very important sets of considerations. One is staying away from the high animal fat, high dairy fat diets which are heavily contaminated with a wide range of cancer-causing pesticides and estrogenic pesticides and industrial pollutants. Now, I should emphasize, while we're discussing fat, that it's not the fat itself, it's what's in the fat. For instance, in the Mediterranean diet, as you know, women can have a very high concentration of fat in the diet, going as high as 40%, and what we see in Mediterranean women are very, very low rates of breast cancer. So it's the animal fat, which is highly polluted with pesticides, which you have to stay away from.
We find that these patients, not only the cigarette produce lung cancer, patients are eating chicken. And the chicken that we eat in the market, they are full of anabolic and full of steroids that they can develop lung and lymphomas cancer.
The foods that we eat and the water that we drink have a great deal to do with our body's ability to prevent cancer. Chemicals that are added to the food, whether they're preservatives or colors or other kinds of flavoring additives, are often suspicious, and many of them have actually been shown to be actual carcinogens. So step one in avoiding carcinogens in the diet is to not eat any foods that have chemicals added to them. Organic foods are a very good way to accomplish this, because organic foods not only don't have chemicals added, they also are not grown with pesticides or with synthetic fertilizers that are carcinogens. So this is a good place to start. When you're buying foods that are prepackaged, read the label. If there's something on the label that you don't recognize, don't eat it.
The typical Western diet, which is mostly packaged foods with a heavy use of chemicals, overcooked foods, for example, and foods that are just not our genetically determined foods, are important. What I mean by that is our genetics really are a throwback to the Stone Age. Our genetic makeup has changed little over the last 10 to 15,000 years. So we're consuming foods that genetically just don't work well. And an example of how the body might try to deal with that is by producing certain types of cancers, which are obviously a symptom of something else causing the cancer. It's important to realize that once someone discovers cancer, that there are other factors that have caused that cancer. Genetics are one thing, but we need to think that genetics also might mean that we have a much higher need for certain nutritional factors that we're not getting from our standard Western diets. So we need to look back at what our ancestors ate in terms of a larger percentage of raw foods, no processed and refined foods, certainly no or very little caffeine and alcohol, and of course stress factors are a very big part of it too.
Recent studies have shown that the risk of breast cancer from the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes has been grossly overstated. And I should also emphasize that these genes are responsible for no more than 5% of all breast cancers, and in no way can they be incriminated in the massive increase in breast cancers over the last few decades. In 1950, 1 in 20 women were getting breast cancer in their lifetime, and now 1 in 8 women are getting breast cancer. So genetic factors can in no way explain this increase in breast cancer. I should also point out that apart from this dramatic increase in the incidence of breast cancer, we're seeing an increase of a particular kind of breast cancer, namely estrogen-sensitive breast cancers. Over the last 3 decades, the incidence of estrogen-sensitive breast cancers has gone up about 130%, whereas the incidence of estrogen-insensitive breast cancers has only gone up by about 20% or so. This gives one a very important message, namely that women are being exposed to very high estrogenic influences in their environment. And these estrogenic influences, as I said before, include oral contraceptives, estrogen replacement therapy, high-fat animal diets contaminated with pesticides, which are both carcinogenic, and also meat containing high levels of estrogens and other hormones, which are used to fatten cattle in feedlots prior to slaughter.
The problems with hormone replacement therapy is that after a woman has been on hormone replacement for 5 years or more, she will have a 32 to 71% increase in the risk of breast cancer. This is whether it's estrogen alone or estrogen with a synthetic progestin. This was shown to be true in a landmark study published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1995. This was a prospective study involving 725,000 person years, a very thorough study using nurses who were perfectly healthy at the beginning of the study. And yet, to this day, most physicians will prescribe estrogen and synthetic progestin to their women who ask for hormone replacement. The physicians will use as a reason for this that the woman has a much greater chance of dying from a heart attack or strokes than she does from breast cancer. Therefore, in the physician's mind, the benefit-risk ratio is adequate.
It's hard to believe that something as small as bacteria or viruses can cause cancer, but they do. Viruses are fairly well accepted as causal agents in cancer. Bacteria are less so. However, we have been changing our thinking about bacteria and chronic disease in the last 10 years, beginning with ulcers, and now people are looking at arthritis. And so the question emerges, can bacteria cause cancer as well?
We have to look at the focus in someone's body. That's the work by Dr. Easels, Dr. Rao. We look mainly at root canals. Because of all the work that has been done on root canals, everybody who comes with cancer has to get rid of their root canals. There's no discussion anymore. You can read the book, The Root Canal Cover-Up by Dr. Menick, to find out more about that. Secondly, you have to look at tonsils, sinuses, gallbladder, prostate, or any infection that could be lingering somewhere in the body which depresses the immune system.
Another theory is that the bacteria serve as tumor promoters, and that they persist as genomes inside the host cells. And when they regain their cell walls, they secrete something similar to a human growth hormone known as choriogonadotropin, and that hormone may play a role in preventing the immune system from recognizing the cancer cells. I suspect that the main role of bacteria in cancer is tumor promotion. That is, when the body is already compromised immunologically or nutritionally, the latent bacterial infections will kick in and contribute to the whole cancer process. The bacterium that has been most well documented as causing cancer is Helicobacter pylori. Helicobacter pylori is associated with gastric carcinomas, that is, stomach cancers. However, there are a number of other common bacteria, such as Streptococcus and Staphylococcus, that have been found associated with tumors and that some scientists believe will also cause bacterial infections.
Until recently, the human body, which has evolved over thousands of years, seemed to do a fairly good job of adapting to the changes within the environment. Within the past century, however, the rate at which people have been exposed to new and toxic substances has accelerated so rapidly that the result has been a breakdown in the body's natural adaptation and defense processes. Certain physicians view this breakdown as one of the major contributing factors in many of today's most dreaded diseases, especially cancer.
Air pollution is a major determinant of disease prevalence. The proper intake of clean air is important for general body function, and if we're consuming various types of chemicals and breathing them in, we're going to interfere with the normal functioning of our cells. So I think common sense tells us that we need to clean up our air supply in order to clean up our internal environments. So external environments such as air is needed to clean up our internal environments.
Living in the vicinity of hazardous waste sites, living near chemical plants which emit chemical pollutants. And also, over and above these factors, you've got one very important group of risks, namely the workplace. We know that at least 1 million American women are working in jobs which expose them to chemicals which have been shown in animal tests and in human studies to cause breast cancer. The final group of risk factors, which I call the lifestyle risk factors, they include excessive alcohol, particularly starting in adolescence, tobacco, again particularly starting in adolescence, inactivity, and obesity. And many of these factors are interrelated, but for all of these factors, we have clear-cut scientific evidence of varying degrees showing that they can cause breast cancer, and we summarize the scientific information, we provide detailed citations for them, and for each we discuss ways and means in which women can protect themselves from each of these risk factors.
Radiation is another issue that needs to have your full attention. Not only do you have to deal with radiation if you're an air traveler on airplanes, but issues such as electromagnetic radiation, which can occur from power lines or even from the wiring in your home, are important to deal with. And one very good way of assessing that risk is to have your power company, your electric company, come out to your house and measure the electromagnetic fields. And this is a very simple thing to do. There is generally no charge, and the results are very enlightening in some cases.
Just as recently, it has been established that brain cancers are increased with portable phones. So in a similar way, maybe our children living near radioactive stations, living near EM fields, etc., might have a increase of cancer caused by that.
We know that about 1% of women are silent carriers of a particular gene known as the AT gene, which makes them highly sensitive to radiation. And these women also will have a family history of breast cancer and are particularly likely, therefore, to be urged to have premenopausal mammography. Now, when you carry the AT gene, the breast becomes exquisitely sensitive to radiation, and your risks of getting breast cancer if you carry the AT gene are very high. And in fact, we estimate that up to about 20,000 breast cancers a year of the 180,000 which we have every year are due to radiation of women that have breast cancer that carry the gene. One final consideration is the following, and that is that when you compress the breast, and when you go for mammography, as you know, the breast has to be compressed to make the thinnest layer possible for the X-rays to pass through. If you do have a small undetected tumor, you can rupture the blood vessels next to that tumor, and cancer cells can spill out from the actual tumor itself and spill out into the blood, and you can get metastases and invasion.
For the past 30 years that I've worked in the field of radiation and cancer, we have learned beyond any doubt whatever that ionizing radiation, such as medical X-rays or atom bomb radiation, but more stringently medical X-rays, definitely can cause cancer in humans. And in 1965, there were very specific studies proving that breast cancer is caused by medical X-rays.
At one time it was said that these were safe, and now we know otherwise. The effects are cumulative, meaning if you were exposed to radiation, as we all are, on a daily level, the effects of most of that radiation is cumulative or adds up daily to the point where our bodies may not be able to keep in check the detrimental effects of ionizing radiation. One of those effects is an increase of production of what are known as free radicals. And these are just highly reactive chemicals that literally cause aging and are associated in higher amounts in every single chronic disease, including cancer.
There is no safe dose of radiation. We have a definitive proof that not only is there no safe dose of radiation, we've proved that there can't ever be a demonstration of a safe dose of radiation. Now that news is unpopular in some circles, but the fact is, it's true.
Tamoxifen has been used for nearly 2 decades for treatment of women with breast cancer, and it has had a modest success, particularly for reducing risks of breast of the other side, which is called contralateral cancer. We've known for some time that there are various complications to tamoxifen, including uterine cancer and other complications. But what is relevant to this book is that the American Cancer Society and National Cancer Institute have embarked on a trial in which they recruited healthy young and women and women of elder ages and told them that they can reduce their risks of breast cancer if they take this drug. Now, the evidence that tamoxifen can reduce the incidence of breast cancer in healthy women is, I would say, pretty close to wishful thinking and believing in Santa Claus or what have you. Evidence is paper thin. What isn't paper thin is the fact that tamoxifen is a very potent drug which will induce artificial menopause in healthy women, and also which has been shown to induce uterine cancer, to increase risks of uterine cancer very substantially, and also, apart from that, to be one of the most potent liver carcinogens that we know.
And toxicity is, I think, in this 20th century, is one of the major causes and leading problems of cancer. You know, cancer was almost unheard of, but very, very rare at the turn of the century. But what's happened since then, we've had a modernization which has brought with it lots of pollution, both in the air that we breathe, the food that we eat, the water that we drink, and with that has been a soaring increase in cancer.
It's well known that stress affects every bodily function, and that stress could either cause cancer or at least cancer results in profound physical, mental, emotional, and chemical stress. So either way, we need to teach persons with cancer and those who wish to prevent cancer on how to manage their emotional states. In other words, how they internalize daily events so that they're not interpreted by our brains as being stressful per se. The body doesn't distinguish between being excited and being stressed for a negative reason. That's something that's made on a conscious level, which then follows through a certain biochemical pathway. So we can do a lot in terms of our mental attitudes in controlling the most important factor, I think, or one of the most important factors in cancer prevention treatment, namely stress.
There are basically 2 parts to prevention of cancer. One of them is making your body and your immune system as strong as possible and as durable as possible to prevent a relapse. The other part is to avoid those factors that tend to cause cancer. These are carcinogens, and they exist in a number of places in our lives.
There's a group of causes which we can call the lifestyle, and these in particular are drinking heavily, particularly binge drinking starting in adolescence. And it's particularly interesting that it's not the alcohol that does it, but alcohol increases estrogen levels, particularly in women that are on estrogen replacement therapy. So If a woman's on estrogen replacement therapy and she has more than 2 drinks a day, her estrogen levels shoot right up. There are also questions of contaminants in alcohol which are less important. Then there's the question of tobacco. We have now evidence that tobacco smoking, particularly starting in adolescence, is an important risk, and for prolonged periods of time than heavy smoking, will significantly increase risks of breast cancer. But there are 2 other very important factors which you have to stress, namely obesity. Obesity itself is clearly an avoidable, an important avoidable risk of breast cancer. Obesity, especially in postmenopausal women, is associated with very high levels of estrogens, which are, the estrogens are secreted by abdominal fat cells which manufacture them from a group of male-like hormones known as DHEA, or testosterone-like precursors. And then there's inactivity. Inactivity generally goes together with obesity, and the 2 together tend to be a very, very significant and important set of factors.
We know that there's been no change in the lifespan for women with breast cancer from 1930 to now. So, if there's been no change in lifespan, all of our treatments have not been very effective. We go through the motions, we surgerize, we do radiation, we do chemotherapy, but same length of life. What has been shown to increase this length of life, and only one thing has been, is lifestyle changes. If you change your dietary factors to a low-fat, high-fiber diet with vitamins and minerals added, if you stop smoking, stop alcohol, bring in exercise, learn how to reduce stress and modify your brain waves to quiet them down, you will, in fact, extend life. These studies are replete from the Japanese studies, and many other large epidemiological studies show the same thing. Change your lifestyle if you have a breast cancer, or for that matter, any diet-related tumor like colon, prostate, etc. Change your lifestyle, and you will live longer with conventional treatment.
If a woman carries certain genes, is there any justification for mastectomy, double mastectomy? When it comes to the AT gene, the answer is certainly not. All that a woman needs to do if she's found to have the AT gene, or if any family members, and there is unfortunately at the present moment no easy screen for that, or family members have the actual disease, what's called ataxia telangiectasia, to stay away from radiation, and under no circumstances to allow herself to have mammography.
Needless to say, in just one segment, we can't handle everything on cancer, so we'll return next week, sharing more in our continuing series on cancer, natural approaches. I'm Gary Null. Thank you very much for watching.